Well, good afternoon, one and all. I know you can hear
Hello
me
there.
out there. Getting various little messages popping up. Okay. I'm trying to put Donald very kindly sent some readings, that his translations of selections from Lamont, and I thought I could just simply put them in the chat, but the thing is not proving very amenable to that. So with Zoom, you can kind of basically just drop something into the chat, but maybe you can't do that with Teams. Does anybody get an idea of how to do that? To make something available?
Should be able to do that in Teams, yeah.
Jamie Grant, for example.
If you no, as Rob said, you should be able to do that.
I can't hear you, Jamie. Is it me or is it you?
Can you guys hear me?
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Is that what we're saying? Okay, that's great.
Can you hear me?
Looks like I'll have to. You could
Yes,
just
Donald.
carry on.
Yes.
If you can hear me,
Yes.
that's fine.
Yes.
I would
Hello,
also like
Donald.
to hear what goes on next, but I may have to come in and out. But before I do that, I think what I'll do is I'll just introduce Donald Meek, who actually some say he's no introduction because he is one of our own, although he is very much independent and free thinker in his own right, although belonging to a tradition which is at one point very honourable and ancient, going back to, as my Baptist principal of the Baptist College way back in Glasgow many moons ago said, we have the Baptist principles going back to John the Baptist. He was the very first Baptist. And, you know, who better than that? And Donald is in that kind of great line of, what should we say, one who points the way to Christ, and yet also one who is prepared in that tradition to be able to call out things where they need to be called out, particularly in the mainstream ways of doing things. But having said that, the constructive amount of work that he's done in recent years, over the decades, is colossal and admirable and impressive, and it shows no sign of letting up. As you know, Donald has been the chair at Aberdeen and also in Edinburgh of Celtic Studies. But ever since his retirement, I think he's gone from strength to strength in terms of the quality of and volume of his writing, and the energy is very much there. And we are the very grateful recipients of all that. And Donald has been already involved very much with HTC the last couple of years, but at least at a conference we had about 18 months ago in Dingwall, on church history, where Donald spoke very eloquently, introduced us to some Gaelic poetry, which was otherwise unknown to me, particularly with reference to creation and such things. Donald's also famous for perhaps again with that sort of sense of one foot in the mainstream and the tradition, and one foot sort of slightly out of it, able to call out sort of slightly romantic Presbyterian notions of what Celtic Christianity looked like. And we were able to set the record straight at that. And I think we're all in his benefit for that. And so therefore, we're moving today to talk about to hear about Donald's particular person at the moment, which is this. Somebody actually put the thing in the chat. Is that what I'm seeing? I've got a lot of stuff going into the chat here. Oh no, okay, right, that's something else. Okay. We'll do our best. If anybody can help me with getting, I can certainly send to Jamie the email with the attachment, and I'll maybe let Jamie take over at this point while I try to get back on, and so I can actually hear what is being said and not just hear my own voice. But Donald, great to have you with us. And Jamie, if I can just hand over to you, and I'll also try to send you this attachment that Donald sent to me. Okay.
Hello there, everyone. I take it you can hear me clearly.
We can, Donald, yes.
That's great. That's always what I worry about, being seen but not heard. It was a virtue at one time, but when you're on this sort of game, it's not quite a virtue. It's lovely to be with you and to be taking this seminar from Tyree. That is singularly appropriate because that's the home island of the subject of this talk, the Reverend Dr. Donald Lamont. It gives me great pleasure to give you this seminar and my talk on Lamont. Now, what I'll try to do is to give my talk and then to feed in some of the translations of Lamont's pieces, which I have tried to provide. I've put my notes in front of me at the moment, and I hope that you're still able to hear me, that I'm not blocking mics or anything. All okay? That's good. That's just great. Right. Well, the topic is the Reverend Donald Lamont, and he was known by various names in this island. He was known as Donlian, Donald the son of John, for reasons which I'll make clear later. He was also known in our house as Donald and Dulacan, Donald of the pages, Donald of the leaves, because he was the editor of the Gaelic supplement of Life and Work. Donald and Dulacan was the sort of man you loved to hate. It depended, of course, what perspective you held about spiritual matters, about theology and so on, whether you got on or didn't get on with Donald and Dulacan. But he little cared, because he was filling his monthly Gaelic supplement for Life and Work. So you could go whistle, or preferably go read. Now, if you go not to Tyree, but to the village of Blairathel, Perthshire today, and take time to visit the small parish church by the roadside, some of you may know it, you will find a beautifully maintained building with lightly varnished pews and a very bright interior. On the wall on the left of the pulpit, you will see a fine wooden plaque in memory of the Reverend Donald Lamont, D.D. And it says this in English: the beloved minister of this parish, 1908 to 1946. Himself a true man of God, he showed to his people the things of God through the wisdom of his preaching and the excellence of his example. And that's certainly a commendation. And then at the bottom of the plaque is the Gaelic statement, Sar Gael, scrive a chynnych an hein, na litrachas. An outstanding Gael, he wrote his own memorial in his literature, that is, in his Gaelic literary output. That literary output in Gaelic was sustained for 5 years longer than his ministry in Blairathel, and lasted from 1907, when he became editor of the Gaelic supplement of Life and Work, to 1951, when finally he relinquished the editorship. Editing in this case involved writing most of the monthly supplement each month, with occasional items by other contributors. And at its fullest, the supplement consisted of 8 pages. And the type is fairly closely written in columns. So it was a fair amount every month for a minister to attend to. In effect, Lamont sustained 2 parallel but interrelated ministries, one in the word preached in the pulpit of Blairathel Parish Church for 38 years, and the other in the word written in the Gaelic supplement of Life and Work for 44 years. That was quite remarkable. One was a ministry to a single parish, while the other was a ministry to all Gaelic-speaking parishes and Gaelic-reading people in Scotland. By the time Lamont was writing his last contributions to the supplement, he was aged 76 and living in retirement in the old manse of Pilmuir to the north of Haddington, East Lothian. His age at that point makes me laugh, because I'm giving this talk today at the age of 76, and I feel I'm just starting rather than retiring. No minister ever better exemplified the powerfully creative combination of the pulpit and the pen in the cause of Gaelic literature. His contribution to the latter was quite simply immense, and in my view it deserves much greater recognition than it has received hitherto, even though a very good selection of his non-religious writings was published in 1960. Lamont was not a man to blow his own trumpet in life or in death, and he fair hated the people that did blow their trumpets. His grave lies at the back of the church, beside the back door, and is not prominently at the front. It is marked by a gravestone in the shape of a plain Celtic-style cross. The inscription is simple, remembering him only as the minister of Blair Athol and Struan churches. The stone has weathered and requires cleaning and relettering, something that I will arrange next year with the agreement of the family. Similarly, Donald Lamont's reputation as a major Gaelic writer has dropped from public awareness over the last 20 years and requires to be freshly relettered for another generation. And I'm beginning that job now. Who then was the Reverend Donald Lamont? Most people who have encountered his writings know that he was from Tiree, and that's very important to note. And if you don't note anything else today, please note that. And they rest their knowledge on the brief outline given by the Reverend T.M. Murchison. Tom Murchison succeeded Lamont, in fact, as the editor of the supplement in 1951. The outline given by T.M. Murchison in his edition of the prose writings of Donald Lamont of 1960, but much more requires to be said. Donald Lamont, born on the 4th of February 1874, was the son of John Lamont Crofter Ruig, Tiree, and his wife Euphemia MacFadgen. And Ruig is just the next village along from my own township of Cooless. It's very easy to get there, just a mile along the road. He had two brothers, John, who became a distinguished sea captain, and Hugh, who was a crofter, postman and postmaster. He also had several sisters. I knew Donald's brother Hugh and Hugh's wife Kate very well indeed. I was often in their home on a Sunday evening. They would come to the services at the little independent church where my father used to preach in Ruig. And I would go there and we would talk about the friends, and I would inquire about Donald, of course. Oh, how was Donald? The Reverend Dr. Donald Lamont. And it was such an honour for a young boy to be able to be initiated into that sort of company. Quite remarkable. Donald at home was just Donald. One of Donald's sisters, Katie Ann, was married to Lachlan MacLean, a crofter in Cooless, my native township, and they lived just across the road from my MacDonald's in Callview. And I'm speaking from Callview right now. There were also further connections with Cooless and my home through marriages. So I was very much aware of the Lamonts in my boyhood. They were very kind people. The whole family was distinguished for its kindness and admired by my folk for their generosity, brightness and ready wit. Sadly, I never met Donald Lamont. I wish I had, but by the time I was a young fella, he was that bit older. He was my age and not so inclined to come back to Tiree. But I heard about him often, as he and my father were very good friends, and my father loved his writings in the Gaelic supplement. Donald Lamont was forever trying to bring my father, a Baptist, into the Church of Scotland. And he was aware that my father wanted to go to Glasgow University, but did not have the funds to do so. So Donald was regularly offering the fees to be paid by the Church of Scotland if only my father would cross the line. But my father didn't cross the line. They remained good friends, of course, and my father maintained the ministry in the Church of Scotland here in Tiree, as well as the Baptist Church. So there was no animosity at that level, and as a family we held Donald Lamont in the highest respect. Donald Lamont went to the local public school in Ruig. They were called public schools in those days. In fact, that was the primary school that took you to age 14. There he would have been taught by Duncan Gunn, a native of Altbehig, Gairloch, who became the Ruig teacher and headmaster about 1880. My elderly relatives, who were Donald Lamment's contemporaries, spoke of Mr. Gunn with great warmth as a fine teacher. Gunn would have recognised Donald Lamment's abilities in an instant, and it is no surprise that he directed him to Raining School in Inverness for the next stage of his education. Some of you will know the Raining's Steps in Inverness, popularly known as the Raining Steps for reasons that I wouldn't understand, of course. But at the top of the Raining Steps was Raining School, founded by a man called Raining and under the control of the SSPCK, the Society in Scotland for Propagating Christian Knowledge, at the outset. However, as it developed, Raining School became the school for bright Gaelic-speaking boys in the Highlands and Islands, and it gave a great service to the Highlands and Islands in that way. Because of its SSPCK origin, people have seen it as an institution to root out Gaelic, as with the SSPCK, a kind of smear which is not entirely true, and at the same time not entirely without justification. But Raining's was an exemplary school, and it produced outstanding graduates. Its headmaster in Lamment's time was Dr. Alexander MacBain from Badenoch, whom I have described elsewhere as the greatest professor of Celtic that Scotland never had. MacBain was a tremendous scholar, and some of his pupils from Raining's distinguished themselves in many academic disciplines, including the decipherment of Linear Brie and archaeological digs at Crossos. They were brilliant boys, and among them was Donald Lamment. Another about whom you may have heard, also from Tiree, was the Reverend Hector McKinnon, who was known as Spurgeon of the North, his dates being 1866 to 1913. And he went to the Ruig School and then onwards to Raining's in Inverness, and had a very distinguished career, although he died comparatively young. Brilliant man as well. From Raining's, Donald Lamment proceeded to Edinburgh University, where he was a student from about 1894-5 to 1898, when he graduated MA. Lamment studied Gaelic and Celtic subjects with Professor Donald McKinnon, the first Celtic professor in Scotland, who took up the new chair of Celtic at Edinburgh in 1882. Lamment thought very highly of McKinnon, as he tells us in his obituary of the professor, and McKinnon thought so highly of Lamment that Lamment acted as his external examiner in Celtic between 1903 and 1906. Lamment became McKinnon's close friend. He and the professor in later years were great buddies. Lamment also got to know Alexander Carmichael, compiler of Carmina Gadelica, which some of you will be familiar with, a collection of charms and incantations which Carmichael gathered in the Hebrides mainly. It is more than clear that this was a friendship that Lamment valued, and he was also very fond of the Carmichael's daughter Elizabeth Catherine, popularly known as Ella, as he sang her praises in a surviving Gaelic love song. Unfortunately, William J. Watson, who succeeded McKinnon as Professor of Celtic at Edinburgh in 1914, beat him to it and married Ella in 1906. When Ella died in 1928, Donald Lamment wrote a splendid obituary which contains a deeply personal note of affection for his lost lady. It's one of those obituaries which is very touching, particularly if you know a wee bit of the background. Lamment acted as a confidant to the Watsons and to Ella, and they were obviously very close over the years. Donald Lamont was at Edinburgh at a very stimulating time in the history of Gaelic literature, centred on the Mackinnons and the Carmichaels. Professor Mackinnon was a well-known Gaelic essayist, writing principally on the significance of Gaelic proverbs and Gaelic identity. Alexander Carmichael was busy editing and expounding the charms and incantations which he had collected in the Hebrides. At much the same time, Donald McKechnie, a native of Jura, who was also part of the Carmichael circle, was writing groundbreaking essays about the natural world, post-Darwin. And I am often reminded of McKechnie when I read Lamont's essays on environmental themes. Licensed to preach by the Presbytery of Edinburgh in 1900, Donald Lamont was assistant to a distinguished Gaelic minister, the Reverend Robert Blair, at St John's, Edinburgh. His first charge was the parish of Glenurquhart, Loch Nesside, in 1902, where he served until he moved to Blair Athol in 1908. He mentions his time in Glenurquhart occasionally. In one of his essays, he comments on how beautiful the bell in the church of Glenurquhart was, compared with the rather doleful and flat bell in the church at Blair Athol. Lamont then moved to Blair Athol in 1908. His move to Blair Athol was a match made in heaven, so to speak. Lamont remained there until his retirement in 1946 at the age of 72. He found Blair Athol a very congenial place where he was perfectly at home with other Gaelic speakers in what he considered a magnificent environment, offering many sources of inspiration. He resided in the old manse of Blair, a very large building with ivy on its walls, beautifully situated, about 2 miles from the church, and close to a birchwood, which often features in his essays. The old manse, where Donald Lamont lived on his own in considerable luxury, with a housekeeper looking after him, is now a very upmarket and expensive hotel. So think twice before you decide to have a wee holiday at the old manse of Blair Athol. Lamont's appointment as editor of the Gaelic Supplement was an inspired choice in itself, and it seems likely that his nomination would have been well supported by Professor Donald Mackinnon and other friends in Edinburgh. We may also presume that he was already known for his ability to write appropriate material. If we were to make a closer study, a detailed study, which is urgently required, of the supplements over the years, before Lamont as well as after Lamont, we would probably see Lamont contributing to the earlier supplements and gaining his confidence in writing. I suspect that he was already well known as a most able writer before he was given the task of editing the Gaelic Supplement. The Gaelic Supplement, I must emphasise, was of huge importance to people then. For many, it was their main Gaelic magazine, and the Church of Scotland did a singular service to Gaelic in maintaining the Gaelic Supplement right down to the present time. And I think both Life and Work and the Gaelic Supplement are about to be stopped. And this seems a very appropriate time to remind people of how important the role of the Church has been in the maintenance and development of Gaelic. We have quite a lot of people in the Gaelic world who would say the opposite in a minute, to belittle what the Church has done, to see the Church as the enemy of Gaelic, and so on. But nobody and nothing better illustrates the importance of the Church in maintaining Gaelic and progressing Gaelic literature than the contribution of Donald Lambert and more widely of the Gaelic supplement itself. So people who start on, oh, the Church destroyed Gaelic and all of that, they need to give their heads a shake and learn some Gaelic and read the literature which was produced certainly in this period. Lambert had an orderly approach to the editing of the supplement. He had a kind of game plan, which varied little over his 44 years as editor. What did vary to some extent was, I suppose, the material. It was constantly refreshed, renewed. There was nothing stodgy or boring. Every issue contained at least one sermon, but its main content consisted of what might be called disguised sermons, in the form of reflections on ethics, contemporary issues, and human foibles. These could be straightforward meditations, or more frequently, they could be woven skillfully into short stories or dialogue pieces between different characters. The stylistic variation was infinite, and that was one of Lambert's great strengths. Humorous and often satirical sketches coexisted with serious appraisals of contemporary individuals, writers of the past, book reviews, obituaries of former colleagues, and stories for children. Very broad thematic headings help to give some semblance of order to a very diverse range of material, the main headings being Aun sa Chahar, in the chair, in the editorial chair presumably, Aun sa Challvehe, in the birchwood behind the old manse of Blair, and Akinunyak at the window, where presumably he thought of himself as looking out more widely on the world. Thematic boundaries were not, however, hard and fast. Different forms, styles of essays would intermingle with other themes from other which he usually produced under other headings and so on. There was a bit of a free flow, as you'll see. What is most obvious is that Lambert recognised from the very outset that a supplement consisting solely of sermons, hymns, whatever in that mould, would not and could not appeal to a general readership. And what interests me is that right at the very beginning, he had a clear view of his target readership, not just church people, but general readers in the Gaelic world. And he was very, very much enlightened in that respect. He wasn't restricted to church-going individuals. And this was a remarkably successful prescription, which made the Gaelic pages extremely popular, to the extent that the individual monthly numbers were sometimes bound into annual volumes by enthusiastic readers, including my father. And I have a family heirloom to prove that. My father's assemblant anthology, well, it's more than that, it's a collection of Lambert's writings through the 1920s, bound by himself, is still in use. I use it regularly, the 1920s into the 1930s, and I'm using this little volume for this talk. But imagine the popularity of the Gaelic supplement of Life and Work when individual readers created their own annual volumes, stitched them up, bound them in brown paper, as you can see, and then passed them on to the next generation. My father passed this on to me, and I just loved this volume because the Gaelic appealed to me, the stories appealed to me, and I was introduced through Lambert to Gaelic literature. So there you have a bit of an insight into my own background. And then, of course, when the prose writings of Donald Lambert appeared, a selection of his work published in 1960, that also helped. And I just loved this book. I still do, because the quality of the Gaelic is so truly outstanding. When I mentioned that I was giving this talk on Facebook, when I mentioned that on Facebook, somebody wrote back to say that while he had been on service in Afghanistan, he had taken Donald Lamont's prose writings, this book, with him, and he kept them beside his bunk during his period of service. That in the present day. Now, how many others could, I suppose, aspire to that as Gaelic writers? There's something enduring about his work. The prescription was extremely successful. He used Gaelic that wasn't the high Gaelic of the church all the time. He used normal, natural Gaelic, and he could get through at that level. And the combination of good subject material, easily understood Gaelic, and the support, it must always be said, of the Church of Scotland ensured that the Gaelic readership in the Highlands had a monthly magazine. Very, very important. And people waited. I remember hearing in Tiree how people were waiting each month to hear or to read the next instalment of Donald Lamont's sermons and various musings on subjects at home and abroad. Really quite a compliment to the man himself. So I'm going to turn now to consider some of his broader themes. Although he himself used certain, I suppose, straplines or headlines or whatever you want to call them, it's much easier to pull together some of his work according to the subjects he actually wrote about. And the first one that I have chosen is the environment and the natural world. This subject was by no means new to Gaelic literature. An affection for the natural world can be traced right back to the 8th century in surviving Gaelic writings. But it is expressed predominantly in verse. In the 18th century, Gaelic poets in Scotland celebrated nature in a remarkable body of song and poetry. And this poetic celebration of nature has continued right down to our own time in Gaelic. Lamont, however, presented his own love of the natural world in prose rather than verse. As I've said, he used to derive inspiration from the birch wood behind the old manse of Blair. He would go there regularly on a Monday, and if the weather were favourable, particularly in May and June and early summer, he would sit on a tree stump and write his reflections on the world around him. Now, here's something that amazes me. Although he came from the treeless island of Tiree, we've only got a few sort of palm trees that have been planted by wandering sailors or people who have gone to other parts of the world. That's all we've got in the way of forest. He became very fond of trees and had an intimate knowledge of their different varieties. In addition, he loved the bird life and could distinguish the birds' various melodies and associated moods. He could tell whether the birds were happy or discontented, or like an angry blackbird that he knew intimately, swearing when his portion of food was scoffed by other birds. He has a beautiful essay in which he describes the tune of the blackbird in the birch wood. He's sitting there, he's reflecting on the loveliness of the natural world, and the blackbird is pouring forth his soul. Donald Lamont used to feed these animals, and the birds, whatever came he fed. But on one occasion, he noticed that a peacock, which he also fed, had come along and stolen the blackbird's food. And the note in the blackbird's music changed dramatically, and the blackbird was furious, and according to Lamont, started to swear. And Lamont's point was quite simply how animals can do this and birds can do this and human beings can do the same. As long as everything's okay, they're tuneful. Then when they're not so happy, the mood changes and the bad language can start. This was how he got through to people. His moral lessons were there in his descriptions of the natural world. In empathising with birds and animals in this way, Lamont gives them human characteristics, or at least treats them as understandable in human terms, thus creating a bridge between the species, the different species, in a post-Darwinian mode. I find that interesting in Lamont's writings. He's not trying to set the birds apart or the animals. He claims they've got a better right to the land than humans have in some ways. Now, this type of writing is quite daring in Gaelic, and the real proponent of it, the first one, was the man that I mentioned earlier, Donald McKechnie of Dura, who used to have chats to his dog about the human condition and so on. And he considered the dog at least as good as any human being in having a chat with himself. In one of his essays composed in the Birchwood, Lamont offers a splendidly humorous description of an infestation of rats in the old manse of Blair. He had a big rat and his wife in the house, but they disappeared. And when they came back, they had a family of rats, which created mayhem in the old manse. They had a right good-going ceilidh. And this was a nuisance to Lamont, showing the other side of the natural world. And he decided that the only way to get rid of them was to compose a Gaelic satire on rats, which had allegedly the special powers to clear such usurpers out of the house. And he appears to have been successful, whether because of the satire or whatever else. Now, in writing such pieces, Lamont was very much aware that he was subverting the traditional picture of a serious minister. If you see pictures of Lamont, and I did send one to Mark, you will see that he almost always wears a suit. He wears a collar 6 inches in depth, and he looks very ministerial, if not a bit Jesuitical. He wears his big hat in the true ministerial style, and it would be hard to find a more orthodox-looking minister than Donald Lamont was. My goodness. But then there's the alternative Donald Lamont, the man inside Lamont. And he's busy cocking a snook at ministers. He's subverting the popular perception of ministers and telling people that far from wasting his time as they might think, sunning himself in a birchwood, he is having a refreshing interaction with nature and also with God. And that's important, he says, for his well-being and for the well-being of his preaching. There's a lovely essay in which Donald Lamont writes about the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, or rather his absence from the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. It's one of those essays on the style, when everybody else went to the General Assembly, guess what I did? I stayed at home, he says, so that I could enjoy the nice sunshine in the birchwood and be enriched in a way that I was never enriched by the General Assembly. So he is very, very good at having a bit of fun at the expense of the structures and the hierarchy of the Church of Scotland. It's said, and I find this very hard to believe, that he was offered the chance to be moderator and refused. whoever offered Donald Lamont the chance to be moderator didn't really know Donald Lamont, the Donald Lamont that I know through his Gaelic writings, because he was far happier as a parish minister, preaching to his people and also sustaining this remarkable literary outflow every month. Lamont's portrayals of the countryside surrounding Blair Athol are equally memorable for their deft sketching of its mountains, glens, straths and woods. He was undoubtedly a pioneering promoter of a holistic, that's the word nowadays, understanding of the relationship between humans and their natural environment within an acknowledgement of the divine creator. He really was a pioneer in that, and I'm amazed as I read his writings now at how contemporary in our terms a lot of their themes are. They haven't aged at all. And in fact, Lamont was opening new furrows with his very, very sharp mind. Now, the second theme which I've chosen is Lamont's imaginary parish, called Killiscooming. Lamont's gently satirical and subversive approach to life reveals itself most clearly in a fine series of stories and essays which he constructed within the frame of an imaginary parish, Killiscooming, the cell of Scooman. We'll hear about him a little more later, which he located within the bounds of Clare Vule, the presbytery of Mull. In fact and in fiction, Killiscooming is a composite creation. The parish church itself is modelled on the Blair Athol building, and the parish contains the standard characters of a village and estate like Blair Athol. You have the landlord, the factor, you have the man who's got the deer forest out on rent, you've got the merchant, you've got the banker, you've got the whole lot of them. And of course, you've got the ordinary parishioners as well, and he loves to interact with them too. And there are also recognisable members of his own Lamont family in Tiree. So he draws on his own family for inspiration, pops them into some of his stories with a slight disguise of the name, and they help to carry the story forward. He uses these characters to illustrate a range of human interactions at critical times in the story of the parish, such as the choosing of a new minister and the election of a member of Parliament for the constituency. He also invests several of his Killiscooming stories and characters with ethical, moral and theological teaching, thus allowing the reader to consider the message without the direct preaching of a sermon. Lamont's best-known short story in the Killiscooming imaginary parish sequence is his Tug Vinishtir, choosing the minister. The narrative engine is a series of letters which Lamont has allegedly received from an old friend of his, Shaunach Eching, a rather, I suppose, garrulous lady who likes to write letters. And she has been observing the various procedures and prejudices in the vacancy committee which has been formed to select the new minister of Killiscooming. The story exposes the petty perspectives which come into play in such contexts and the energies which can be misdirected in the process. This is reminiscent, as some of you will gather immediately, of Anthony Trollope's Barchester Towers and the search for a new bishop for the diocese in question. And it is, like Barchester Towers, a comedy of manners, which has lost none of its relevance in the century since it was written. And just to read a little bit to you, if you have the you can see it in your handout, as I would have said to students at in an earlier day. Have a look at your handout. I'll read you just a little bit from this sequence of letters. Ravens Hill, 3/5/23. They set up the committee yesterday. The 5 elders, the schoolmaster, the blacksmith, the laird of Drum, and the butcher, John Mackenzie and red-haired Hugh, the factor and Tom Elliott and the hostelry, 13 altogether. John Mackenzie was put on the committee because there was nobody from the south end of the parish at the meeting but himself. And Tom Elliott was put on because there was never a committee in Killiscooman without Tom Elliott. The schoolmaster was appointed clerk because he is clerk to the session in any case, and the factor was made chairman because nobody else on the committee wanted to oppose him. The clerk had a bucket full of letters from ministers who wanted the parish, with about 12 or 24 testimonials with each letter. At the first meeting, the 3 farmers on the committee said that the spring work was very demanding, and they didn't have the time to look over all the letters and testimonials in the bucket, and so they would be quite satisfied if the clerk chose 7 or 8 of the best ones. The clerk didn't find that easy, for if the letters and testimonials before him were true, the apostles were but poor weak souls compared with the ministers who wanted Killiscooman. King above bless me, said the blacksmith. I never knew until now that there were so many talented people in the church. Some had almost every letter of the alphabet after their names, but although the committee did not know what all the letters meant, they knew that it was for making poison during the war that the minister of Dunskag got an OBE, and so they tossed out the minister of Dunskag and every other one who had letters after his name which they suspected had to do with poison. Eventually, they were all taken out until there were only 7 left. But although the whole committee wanted to reduce them to 3 instead of 7, they failed to do that, as they were not all in agreement about the kind of minister they wanted. Some wanted a young minister, some wanted a married minister. John Mackenzie didn't care whether he had a wife or not, as long as he didn't have a paper, that's for his sermon notes, in the pulpit. The blacksmith wanted a minister who would keep the Baptists and the Free Church folk in their proper place, who would hold a prayer meeting now and again, and who would visit the people frequently. Thus they failed to agree about choosing 3 out of the 7, and in the end they decided that they would let the congregation hear all 7, which was what happened. And there was quite a bit of turmoil in the parish as people debated and discussed the merits and demerits of the ministers, including a fight between shepherds, one taking the side of one candidate, another taking the side of the other candidate, and fighting it out. But in the end, there were 2 potential ministers, and the winner, so to speak, was the Reverend Neil MacFarlane, BD. Reverend Neil MacFarlane, BD. Lamet constantly refers to the Reverend Neil MacFarlane, BD, in other stories in this sequence, and does so in a way that suggests that he disapproves of this newfangled degree of BD. He also disapproves of MacFarlane's ponderous learning and his rather dull, sleep-inducing style of preaching. He's a lovely essay in which he imagines that the people in Killiscooman listening to MacFarlane in the church have all sort of not quite nodded off, but have gone off on their own mental wanders. Some have gone fishing, some have gone like the merchant to tot up their accounts while the sermon is in progress. And eventually, they're almost all asleep apart from one or two. And in the midst of all that, a presence appears right under the pulpit, a glorious shining presence, which they all miss, except the couple who have stayed awake. And he makes his points beautifully. He was a master storyteller. Probably, he knew storytelling from his Gaelic background, and he was also extremely well read in novels and so on in English. That's very clear. So poor Neil McFarlane BD. Ah, dear. It's interesting with Lamont how conservative he is in one way, how subversive he is in another, how modern. He was an interesting mixture. In another Killiscomine tale, item 4, in which the Reverend Neil McFarlane BD discovers the supposed origin of the parish name, Lamont satirises the type of commemorative event which is characteristic of parishes and communities wishing to raise awareness of their roots. And I have this, as I said, as item 4. And this again is a letter from his old pal, Seanach Echin. And she tells him that there's to be this big, huge event in Killiscomine, a big celebration. It's a long, long time since I received a letter from my old friend Seanach Echin, but she wrote to me the other day to tell me that the Reverend Neil McFarlane BD is going to hold a big event sometime in the autumn. He discovered somewhere that the church takes its name from St. Scuman, and that Scuman, Gaelic for boat baler, was the first person to begin bailing boats. He had no sooner told this to the merchant and to Tom Elliott, who owns the pub, than the two of them said that Killiscomine ought to commemorate the saint, that other towns and parishes did it, that Columba was commemorated in Iona and Ninian in Whithorn, that brought many people to these places from Glasgow and Edinburgh, and that it would be good for Killiscomine if strangers and English people came there to spend their money. That was how the thing began, but Seanach Echin says that nobody knows where it will stop. So many people want to have a hand in it and are trying to think of something new and strange that nobody else has thought of. The banker's wife was the first to think of arranging the fishermen in a rank, with a boat baler in the hand of each. This took the wind from the sails of the factor's wife, but it made her only more determined that she would be upsides with the other one, and that she would have her own place and her own noise in the big noisy celebration. And so he goes on in that vein until they find out from Professor Watson in Edinburgh they do not know on which day they should commemorate Scuman, but nevertheless they are going to have a big day. The moderator of the church is to attend, the colonel and the colonel's wife, Sir Ioctan Yehu, who holds the Deer Forest on rent, and his wife, the president of Uncommon Gaelach, and other bigwigs that Seanach Echin couldn't remember. And then he envisages them all going on a parade to the war memorial. There will be the fishermen with a boat baler in the hand of each, Boy Scouts and the schoolmaster at their head, girl guides and the grandchild of the red-haired merchant at their head, the folk from the WRI, the elders, and the Reverend Neil McFarlane, BD. They are all going to march to the war memorial, where a photographer from Oban will be waiting for them to take their photograph. When all that is done, flowers which have been arranged in the shape of a boat baler will be placed on the war memorial by the colonel's wife. The colonel and Sir Ioctan Yehu will make speeches to the assembly, but not about the saints. The schoolmaster will recite, and the whole company will sing the verses that Alistair Muckmeister Alistair, an 18th century Gaelic poet, by the way, made about the bailing of Clanranald's galley. Let there be ready for action in the bold Jerusalem warrior, who will never weaken or be afraid when the oceans roar, with a big round wooden boat baler in his swarthy fists. Then the moderator will bless Guma and the War Memorial and the whole assembly, and the scouts will shout, hooray! Wonderful. Lamont's invention of a parish with a range of typical characters was a masterstroke, as it allowed him to hold critical distance from his topics and to ascribe his own views to his friends in Killiscooming. The beadle, for instance, was one of his alter egos. As Lamont pointed out, the beadle, who was also the gravedigger, was a very learned man, and together they would discuss such challenging themes as eternal punishment. And it's interesting to reflect on Lamont's views of that. I can't go into that today, but it's fascinating to see that as a debate in Gaelic back in the 1920s. And Lamont himself, in these dialogues, would pose as the previous minister of the parish, the ex-minister, coming for a wee chat. What's the gravedigger saying? Let's have a chat with him about Neil MacFarlane's funny preaching and so on. And finally, ethical, moral and social commentaries. Alongside such seemingly light-hearted tales with a serious message, Lamont produced countless commentaries on matters of contemporary interest, very much in the style of an editor of a journal or newspaper. He had strong views on many issues of the day, and he certainly did not hesitate to express these in print. Now, in my handout, I have two of these for you, which I think are quite important. First, there's an item on assisted dying. That's the first item I have on that list. And this discussion of assisted dying comes from the January issue, 1930, of the Gaelic Supplement of Life and Work. Now, we're pressing hard on time here, and we probably won't be able to read it all, but we think of that subject as very much our subject in the present day, but it was live in the 1930s, apparently, certainly in 1930, when Lamont decided that he would discuss it. He says, recently mention was made in the newspapers of a young lad who had terminated the life of his mother in order to put an end to her suffering. She had an incurable illness. The doctors gave up hope, and her bodily pain sometimes exceeded any reckoning. The lad's heart was in agony as he saw his mother suffering, and eventually he took the law into his own hands, and he ended her life. Then the law laid a hand on him. He was brought before a judge and jury, but although it was proved clearly that he had killed his mother, he admitted it freely. The jury did not find him guilty. The first time they conferred, they asked the judge if the lad would be punished if they said that he was guilty. The judge told them that that was not their business, that he could not promise them anything in that matter, and that all they had to do was to do their duty and to state whether the lad was guilty or not. When the jury heard that, they pronounced a unanimous verdict on the lad that he was not guilty. This occurred in France. Now listen to this. But it could happen in Britain. There are thousands in this country who would be in a dilemma like the French jury if they had to reach a verdict in a matter of that kind. Questions are being aired afresh nowadays, which we thought were closed and settled forever. But whatever way this question is raised, I have absolutely no doubt that the route that the lad took was wrong, so wrong that people do not need to argue about it. If they know that there is no betterment for the person and that there is nothing in prospect for him, that was the masculine pronoun of the time, nothing in prospect but bodily pain night and day. When people say that doctors ought to give him something that will allow him to depart speedily in peace, they do not understand properly what they are saying. Their words bear the appearance of sense and the impression of kindness, but in spite of that, there is poison in their teaching. They are defying the wisdom of generations and the teaching of biblical truth. No doctor, Lamont says, or any other person can give life, and for that reason we have no right to take life away. That belongs to God. And he goes into a long discussion about this subject. I found it absolutely amazing that in 1930 this was being discussed so fully, and in Gaelic as well. And then there's a wee personal note here. If you look at this closely, and I hope it can be circulated to you, you'll find so many of today's arguments. Dr. Lamont says, a good doctor too, told me once that a particular person in my congregation was so ill with a growth in his stomach that he would never recover, that he might survive for 6 months, but not for more. 13 years have passed since then, and the man is still alive. The doctor is dead. On the day of his funeral, it truly made me ponder when I noticed the man for whom there was no hope 10 years previously standing among those at the graveside. Though doctors should be wrong only once in 1,000 times, that itself would be sufficient reason for denying them a power which does not belong to persons prone to error. Where have we heard all these sentiments? I was quite astonished to read this. And so rarely do we think of Gaelic literature and, I suppose, the literature of the church in the 20s, 30s and so on, particularly in Gaelic, as being so up to speed. I was astonished. Read most of that if you can get the text. And then to round off, another interesting piece with an ethical dimension, this time about the tinkers. Do you know what tinkers are? Nowadays we call them the travelling people. We've become rather PC, but to us, the tinkers were the tinkers, and they were good friends of ours when they came to Tiree. They wandered around, they went from place to place, they were very purposeful in their own way, and Donald Lamont knew them very well in his time in Blair Athol. There was a debate going on in 1923 about whether the tinkers should be corralled into housing schemes, taken off the roads, provided with better conditions and lifestyles. Lamont wrote, item 2. I just wish people would let the tinkers go their own way, but will they ever? This very day I received a letter asking me to go to a meeting which has been called concerning the tinkers, but I don't think I'll attend it at all. For one thing, the distance is too great, as the meeting is to be held in Edinburgh, and Edinburgh is a step or two from here. For another, it is easy enough for me to see a tinker, and a tinker wife too, without going to Edinburgh, for we don't lack tinkers in Athol. He then goes on to say he knows fine who will be at the meeting, what they'll say, it's all very predictable. And one at the meeting who's a former policeman, he'll want to put them all in a safe place, if not to put them in the nick. He goes on to state that he came across a tinker encampment one night when he was coming home. It was belting rain, it was pouring down, felt sorry for them, wondered how on earth they would endure. And then he went back the next day. The next day, my business took me the same way, and I kept my eye on the tinkers' camp to see how they had fared. There were 8 of them altogether, a man and wife and 6 children, 2 of the children a good size, 3 of them substantial little fellows, and a child on the breast. The day was calm and warm, one of those days which you sometimes see after a storm, as if the elements were regretting their anger of yesterday. When I reached them, the big tinker was harnessing the horse. The house and a good part of the family were already in the cart, and they were on the point of setting off north. But on the level ground where they had had their dwelling last night, the little tinker, a good-sized lad of about 15, was playing the pipes, and 2 of his sisters were dancing. Such are the tinkers. If the colonel's wife had seen them last night under the downpour, she would have sent Marcoupradge, that's the police fellow, to round them up, and Marcoupradge would have sent the chief constable of Perth in pursuit. And in the end, they would have put the big tinker in prison for maltreating the children. But all the time, the tinker's children were as happy as the birds, and with just as little worry. When the rest of the parish children were yawning in school and counting the minutes until it was 4 o'clock and they would be released, the tinker's children were dancing merrily and couldn't care less if they were never to hear of the kings of England or the kings of Judah. And so he concludes that bit. Just a few weeks ago, I saw that the travelling people were asking for an apology for the way that they had been handled over the years, with people trying to force them into new homes and so on, ways of life which they did not want to follow. And here was Lamont in 1923, taking the side of the travelling people, being so aware of their culture, the special qualities which they had. Truly remarkable. Donald Lamont was their champion and friend in the 1920s, and if he had been alive today, he would be there to champion the lifestyle of the travelling people. Again, that little subversive element, you'd have thought, you know, as a man who lived in the glories and luxuries of the old manse of Blair, he would have thought that was the place for people to be. But he thought that it was far more important to let the travelling people be, the tinkers be themselves. Conclusion. It's impossible to do justice to Donald Lamont's immense literary output in a talk like this. And even T.M. Murchison's fine selection of the prose writings of Donald Lamont is inadequate, as Murchison himself humbly acknowledged. However, it may be possible in the years ahead to provide a digital edition of all of his writings and to gain a much broader view of his achievements. It is certainly very clear to me that Lamont was a giant of modern Gaelic literature who paved the way for the major Gaelic literary periodical Gurrim, which some of you may know, which was founded by Derek Thompson and Finlay J. MacDonald in 1952 and spanned a further 50 years. Gaelic speakers, readers and authors owe an immense debt to the skills of the Reverend Donald Lamont and the commitment of the Church of Scotland to producing the Gaelic supplement of Life and Work. Well done indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Donald, very much for that rich feast. And I think there's probably a lot of questions that you could raise. My question that I have, just as well, people are thinking is, and we have about 25 minutes anyway, or something like that, if we need them. Just to ask you that kind of rather general question, which probably exposes a lot of my ignorance, maybe even prejudice as a lowlander. I don't even mind me calling myself a Sassenach. You know, that I look upon somewhere like Blair Athol, having driven past it today, and then Tyree, and then Mull, somewhere kind of geographically not quite halfway, but maybe slightly, almost like that. And just that these seem like very different worlds to me. You know, the world of Blair Athol, you know, obviously it was 100 years ago, so things were very different. There were still people who spoke Gaelic, for example. Not so many perhaps there now. But even so, that's a place obviously fought over during the Covenanter Wars in the 17th century and that kind of thing, that part of the world. So not without its historical interest, but that's certainly over the last, in modern times, a kind of place of establishment and landowners and sort of fairly servile people, and not a great sense of culture. I mean, you have already managed to kind of persuade me otherwise on accounts of the Perthshire poets that you talked about last time round. So maybe this is just another place where my prejudice has to be challenged. But the very fact that he creates a world, a fictive or fictional world, which is somewhere between the islands and his imagination of, based on his experience at Blair Athol, is a curious thing too. Where did he belong? And did he think that, in other words, it didn't really matter as long as there was somebody that he felt he could preach to or could learn from, that the worlds of, say, the islands and the worlds of somewhere like northern Perthshire weren't all really all that different to him? That would be one question I would have.
Yep. A very, very important one, Mark. I've puzzled that one too. The thing about Lamont was that he could bestride different worlds. And your point about, all these sort of, you've got the world of the Presbytery of Mull, you've got the world of Blair Athol, you also have the world of the islands. Blair Athol in its own time was, well, in Lamont's time, but certainly before that, and that whole area was very vibrant with Gaelic. And Lamont would have been aware of that. And he, as I said, it was a composite picture he produced. It's not completely Perthshire, as you've rightly noted. And it's not completely Mull, and it's not completely Tyree. It's a very composite, excuse me. And it's just fascinating. With regard to his place in Blair Athol, I think that he quite enjoyed Blair Athol because it gave him lots of time. It wasn't a very big charge. He could do his own thing, and he could do it very comfortably in the old manse of Blair. If you go through his writings, it's clear that he spent an enormous amount of time reading books. He discusses the books he reads at night, and he tells you all about them, and he critiques the authors and so on. Excuse me. And he has a good go at all of that. But as you say, Blair Athol is a surprising place. He's almost on the very edge of the Gaelic world. And yet he's writing for the heart of the Gaelic world.
Yeah.
That's your central, I suppose, irony or contradiction, Mark.
Yes. And he's not. Well, that's helpful. So he's not kind of aware of Kailyard and that kind of thing, and sort of how we to put that straight, because there's a bit more, slightly more kind of, I wouldn't say acid in his writing, but a little bit more ironic, maybe dark humour sometimes in his account of people. It's not sentimental at all.
No, he's not. He's not at all Kailyardy, Mark. Not in the least. He is the most unromantic fellow you could find in many ways. He appreciates things and enjoys things, but he doesn't go for the sort of, land of lost content stuff. It's about what a pity I left the Highlands, left the islands. None of that. Is a very, very robust embracing of where he is and his wider background and world. No, completely not. I mean, he's the other way. He laughs at Kailyard stuff, even that celebration of the Killiscooming name, which could grace a chapter in a Kailyard novel. Lamont just has a wee bit of fun about it. No.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Who else can I call
on? Bruce here,
Bruce.
Mark. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Donald, for a great talk. And I was just thinking, I just found on my shelves my father-in-law Tom Dow's copy of the prose writings of Donald Lamont, edited by Murchison. But my question was this, Donald. in his comments, I mean, in his era as the person who did the Gallic supplement, obviously that covered the whole era of World War One, the Great War.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering, what his angle was on that, or how he talked about that, or just what you found about that, Donald.
Well, that's exactly one of the questions that I have to investigate further as a result of giving this talk. I let myself in for things. I really do. I always say that's my last book and I'm not going to do any more. And here we go again. And one of the questions is exactly that. Donald Lamont was a chaplain in the First World War. He served at Gallipoli. And there are these very questions, Bruce. And now I will have to go back to the issues for that period. I wonder what they did to fill the gap when Donald was at Gallipoli. Or did he, by some miracle, manage to write pages for the Gallic supplement when he was serving in Gallipoli? What were his views of the war? There are times when he's quite post-colonial. He's not pleased about empire. He's a bit cheesed off, as it were, and has a wee go at that. But there are other times when he's very, very mainline conservative. And I would love to answer that question. You've hit the nail absolutely on the head. I mean, I realise now from this talk that there's still so much to be known. And you have a body of material here which could well enlighten you on some of these questions. And I'm going there first to that period. And when I've looked at it, Bruce, I'll answer your question. I'm sure he's commented on it. He couldn't let that one go. He's certainly listed in the electronic digital lists of those who served in the First World War, and I'll need to fill it out for them because they haven't got enough details about him. But there's so much more to know about that. So sorry, I can't enlighten you immediately, but give me a month or two.
Thanks very much.
Great question, and good for Tom Dow. I used to read some of Lamont in the class that Tom attended when I was in Edinburgh.
Alistair, please. Yeah.
Thanks, Donald, for a really interesting talk. Much appreciated. It's more a sort of just a general observation, really, which I'd invite you to comment on. We don't seem to get so many characters now in the church as maybe we once did. Do you have any thoughts on that, or why that might be?
Well, it's what shall we say, a trend that you can see everywhere. I used to say we didn't have the characters in the universities that we once did. You used to go to university not just to learn things, but to see some of the famously idiosyncratic people that had somehow washed up in these citadels of knowledge. And we had plenty of them in my day in the universities, and the church had similar characters. Lamont was one, no question. And why? Well, there is a uniformity. People, I don't know what's happening in the church, but I can't comment, but in the universities, certainly there was so much regulation that came in during my time. And we had characters, for example, in the School of Scottish Studies, the School of Scottish Buddies, as it was known. And they did great work, but they were regarded as being very strange. They were sort of certainly idiosyncratic. And in the church, I suspect there were ministers who were the same. We certainly had them in Tiree. There was the Reverend Donald Turlough Mackay, who would make a talk on his own. Mackay of Tiree, he was UF. And I mean, he was driven by, his own understanding of the Holy Spirit and where the Holy Spirit wanted him to preach next. And although he was, for example, the minister of the United Free Church in Tiree, he would set off and perhaps re-emerge in Gardner Street, Free Gardner Street Church in Glasgow. I remember the minister there, Kenneth Gillis, telling me about one time when he was preaching and Donald Tulloch Mackay, washed up, came in off the street and immediately wanted to preach in Gillis's pulpit. And so Gillis had to step down and let D.T. Mackay take over. He was just one of the characters that we had here. They were all well known. But nowadays, I mean, you just can't imagine these people being part of a church. Would they be thrown out or would they be sent for a re-education class? I don't know. But in the universities, I mean, I certainly saw that trend. One of the things that I found very difficult myself, because I think I fitted quite well into the idiosyncratic bracket, and I didn't take kindly to smooth-tongued, ignorant managers trying to tell me what to do. I thought I knew much better than they did. And I just loved all the characters. My professor in Glasgow who wore radiantly yellow socks, you know, and all this sort of thing. Or Donald McKinnon, the professor of philosophy in Aberdeen, and his wife having to remind him that it would help things if he put on his trousers before he went to lecture to the students. And no, we don't have them. Have you got any observations on why? I mean, Lamont knew his characters, all the idiosyncrasies, and his essays are full of that. That's about the variety of humanity. Amazing. You got an answer, Alistair?
No, I don't think I do. I don't think I do. But certainly that uniformity, that sort of bureaucratic crushing of individualism, I think that's a feature of many institutions nowadays, and not just the university. HTC accepted, of course.
You've got quite a good gallery of, well...
Etc. Okay, thank you. And speaking of which, no, I was going to say Hector may have an answer for that question, or maybe like a question of his own. Hector. We are muted still, I think. You're still muted.
No, I was going to say certainly in the Church of Scotland, selection school gets rid of most of these characters. In my own background, I've got a granduncle, Peter Chisholm. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Peter Chisholm, but I certainly, my dad and my uncles and that used to speak of him often when I was younger. And basically, when he would be preaching in the church in Graver of a Sunday evening, all the youngsters would go out in the hope that he would go off the head in the pulpit and have a blast at the young ladies or something in the first row of the gallery. But thanks, Donald. Fascinating stuff. You mentioned with Blair Athol, I think that there were many Gaelic speakers there at that time. Are we aware if there were Gaelic services?
Yes, I think so. I think he had a Gaelic service. I'll investigate that. But I think he did. And I'm sure he contributed elsewhere as well. Yeah, I think he did. And there certainly was a need for Gaelic there, Gaelic preaching too. Yes. And Gaelic was around. I mean, I met a Gaelic speaker from Ballinluig, for example, back here in Tiree in the 1970s. You know, you still had Gaelic there. And it was wonderful to talk to him. We had to work out our terms of reference because the Gaelic of Perthshire and Ballinluig was so different from the Gaelic of Tiree. And that was something that Lamont would have had to have tussled with too. He was a great linguist. He was one of those sort of polymath types, incredible brain. And yes, I think he would have taken to preaching in Blair Athol and Gaelic. Yes, yes. Oh, they're very much aware of his Gaelic contribution too. Oh, yes, proud of it.
Very good. A further question. You haven't talked about his theology today.
No, I'll do
And-
that another time if you want it.
Right. Very good. Yeah, we'll look forward to that. From what you know of his writings, where do you think he would fit on the theological spectrum, as it were?
A great question, Hector. I've been working on that one as I've gone through his writings. There are times when he's almost frighteningly liberal. It's quite interesting. And at other times when he's solidly evangelical. There's a I can't categorize him easily. He is betwixt and between. I would have said he was a conditional immortality man, really. I would have seen that as his theological position, or pretty near it. The humanizing of God and God's justice to the point where you can't imagine that he could inflict any punishment on your family or friends. You get that in his essays. And that's one of the things, I mean, I need another talk on that side of Lamont. You see him talking to the beadle, the imaginary beadle of Killiscomany, and the beadle is the one who really holds the key to discussion so often. The beadle tells him that, he can't accept the traditional view of hell and so on, and Lamont sort of nods along with that. Then on the other hand, the beadle says he's very unhappy because he doesn't hear about the devil anymore in the preaching of Neil McFarlane BD, and that Neil McFarlane BD is just giving them metaphorical interpretations of the scriptures. That is not satisfying the people of Killiscomany, right? So you've got that side of Lamont as well. So you have this jostling between quite a conservative man from a conservative background who, in my view, has embraced higher, what did they call it?
Criticism.
The higher criticism, precisely. And I would like to look at that further because it's a very interesting picture of what was going on in the mind of one influential minister. Now, you can see how Lamont's work wouldn't have appealed to certain very conservative readers in the Highlands. And from time to time, he would get an angry note from those who didn't agree with him. And I saw one when I was reading through this saying, "You're laying off for 12 months of the year, giving us all sorts of doctrines which we don't agree with. Could you please give us your magazine for 1 month of the year so that we can get back at you?" And it's quite clear that he was making, he wasn't appealing to some people. My father found him very difficult in matters of baptism. He and Lamont didn't agree on that. And my father kept a rather vitriolic essay and a short story that he wrote about someone who had been converted very late in life, almost on his deathbed, through a Baptist preacher. And, my father wasn't at all pleased on Lamont's take on that. Not at all. He said to me, "No, that wasn't good." So there was that side to Lamont as well. He could fairly get under your skin theologically. Oh, yes. But it's worth another look. As I say, I'm just at the beginning of thinking about these things, mainly because I said foolishly to Mark that I would give a talk on this minister. So here we go again. Another book, another something, more talks. Does that answer some of it? As I read it, I find reading stuff, it's this business of the very traditional minister who is at heart so subversive. It's extraordinary.
Thank you,
Is
Donald.
is that okay?
Yeah.
I was just thinking there, Donald, just from what you described, that I mean, it seems to be a reaction against Highland Calvinism, similar to that of D.M. Bailey, John Bailey, and so on.
Yep.
You know, even in the little bit you described there, there seem to be similarities and parallels.
How interesting. Yep, he does react against that, absolutely does. And some of his short stories show this, particularly when he's dealing with such things as illegitimacy or whatever, and the misbehaviour of people who would normally be thrown out of Highland churches and Highland societies. And he does his best to see the good points as well as the bad, to see kindness and so on. He and the Free Church didn't rub up very well. He had his perpetual enemy, the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. in Stornoway. And the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. used to come in for a bashing because the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. used to attribute certain things to the Church of Scotland, which the Reverend Donald Glamont M.A., who never used that himself, did not like. And there's one particular piece in which the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. is put in his place so firmly that Lamont won't even use the pronoun he. It's always the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. said this. When the Reverend Kenneth McCrae was thinking about this, the Reverend Kenneth McCrae M.A. was thinking about this. So there's this ding-dong as well. Yeah. So it's a theme, I mean, it's a very rich theme, this one, because I say 44 years of constant writing. Way-ho. And the material in there, and a picture of the churches and how Lamont was quite ecumenical. You know, that was the other thing you see in his work. He's happy for the 1929 Union. He's pleased about that. He's very open in that way. So he's an old conservative moving into a broader kind of, what do they call it nowadays, liberal evangelical position.
Right. Sounds about right. Yes, question. Sorry, I don't have your name there.
It's Dol Michael here. Thanks for Dol. That was a fantastic talk. Very much enjoyed it. Just following on to your response to Hector, with bringing in Kenneth McCrae as well. I know that post-disruption, well after the disruption, it was commonplace to label people who didn't agree with them as more or less apostate, and that's still a problem actually when you go up to places like Lewis. That kind of thing can be considered. It's not quite as bad as it used to be. But I've always seen, and I haven't read any of his sermons, I've only read his writings, but I've always seen him as a guy who was almost playing devil's advocate, representing every possible point and using these amazing characters that he created to get these points across. And possibly his own views might be more apparent in sermons and things like that. But I just found him as an amazing writer with superb skill and innovation in the way he maintained this for decades, for 40 odd years, to maintain this level of this high level of writing and the attention of people. And I suspect probably some of his colleagues might have been a bit jealous of the attention that he might have got as well.
Wonderful comment, Michael. Thank you so much. We'll have to meet. We've been meaning to do that for ages. And among our topics on the agenda will have to be Donald Glamont's writings. But I quite agree with you. He was moving away from the old adversarial positions that I think he must have seen himself and been very much aware of. He was also, for better or worse, from Tyree, where there was a much more liberal spirit around, and still is, and in Argyll, the wider Argyll sort of constituency. And that was much more accommodating. We didn't have this kind of, friction. UF, Baptist, Church of Scotland, they rubbed along well in Tyree, and Lamont was used to that. But I think you've hit the nail on the head about representing all sorts of different viewpoints and devil's advocate. Is this why I find it so difficult to make up my mind what Donald Lamont really was, in terms of his theology? Is that his strength rather than his weakness? He's not writing to a particular understanding. I can't imagine that he would have lasted 10 seconds with the Free Presbyterians. Oh, great points. We can do more of his theology. I think, there's a huge gap in the study of Gaelic theology and what the preachers held as their main tenets, and how Lamont fitted or didn't fit into that would be a marvellous subject. In fact, if you folk know of anyone who'd like to do a PhD on the Gaelic supplement, well, what a topic. I wish I could have done it in my time. Wonderful. Great to have you going to be here.
Good. Well, we're coming to a close, I think. But if there's anyone with the last question that you'd like to ask us before we wrap up, or let's not ask us, ask Donald. But other people are prepared to express their opinions in the way that Lamont himself was. Feel free to do so, or to ask a question. Just in the short time remaining. And if not, perhaps we can close in prayer. Jamie, would you like to say a prayer for us just at the end, just to commit ourselves?
Sure.
God, and to be thankful for Donald's contribution and what he's led us to think about today. Thank you.
Yeah, let's pray. Holy God, we thank you that you are the God who speaks. We thank you that you speak to us through your scriptures, and we thank you that you continue to speak to us through learning from historical figures, Lord, from the saints of bygone years. And Holy God, we just thank you for this time that we've had together this afternoon. We thank you for Donald, for the work that he has done over the years and the work that he continues to do. And we thank you, Heavenly Father, that there is just much to learn from these saints of the past, and help us, Lord, to be a people who are keen to hear. Lord, we give ourselves into your hands, and we pray for your leading in all things in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 And thanks again to Donald. And Donald will be back with us after in the new year as a date to be arranged or rearranged, I should say. And we look forward to that and the chance to actually convene in the Mallard thereafter for a swift beverage and discussion in a way which we can't always do quite so easily in this format. But I think it's served us pretty well, apart from the glitches at the start. I think we just about got there. And so thanks to all who attended from wherever you attended from, and certainly to Donald again for his talk. And let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you very much. I loved doing that, folks. It was just great. And thank you for the opportunity. I've been, I suppose, looking forward for years to that kind of opportunity to speak about Lamont. And I've never had it until now. Thank you so much.
It's great. Thank you, Donald.
So wishing you, if it's not untimely, a great Christmas when it comes, and see you in the new year. Some of you anyway.
Indeed. Very best wishes to you all. Bernach Leib, as I